Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be reading some Kant, an introduction to Kant's Prolegomena by Beryl Logan. So let's start reading. In the preface 2 of the Prolegomena, Kant states that, quote, the suggestion of David Hume was the very thing which, many years ago, first interrupted my dogmatic slumber and gave my investigation in the field of speculative philosophy quite a new direction. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant refers to the uncritical dogmatist as one who, quote, has not surveyed the sphere of his understanding and therefore has not determined, in accordance with principles, the limits of his possible knowledge, end quote. The conclusion that Hume draws in his attack on a, quote, single but important concept in metaphysics vis-a-vis that of cause and effect, prompted Kant to undertake this survey in the Prolegomena concerning any future metaphysics, in order to determine the possibility and limits of metaphysical knowledge. So what do we have here? So Kant is going to undertake this survey after Hume's attack in the Prolegomena concerning any future metaphysics in order to determine the possibility and limits of metaphysical knowledge. As a result of the importance that Kant places on Hume's argument, I intend to adopt as my particular viewpoint in this introduction what Kant perceives as problems in Hume's philosophy and has answers to those problems. Generally, this consists in responding to Humean skepticism by offering conditions under which objective validity is possible. Where appropriate, I will make reference to Hume's doctrines in order for the reader to be more familiar with some of the arguments to which Kant was responding in the Prolegomena. This will allow the reader not only to grasp the force and intent of Kant's own positions, but also to recognize the pivotal role played by one of Kant's precursors in the development of his critical philosophy. This focus is also reflected in the scholarly literature, as is evident in the bibliography included in this volume. The first issue dealt with is the nature of the causal connection, a dominant concern in the Prolegomena. Kant is seeking a way to provide objective validity for causal judgments. So that's a really important thing because we don't get that in Hume. As Hume's position only allows subjective validity and results in skepticism. We then turn to Kant's arguments with respect to Hume's position on mathematics, which are closely allied to causality, because Hume considered all judgments to be either matters of fact, synthetic propositions known a posteriori, or relations of ideas, analytic propositions known a priori. The causal relation was regarded by Hume to be the former and mathematics to be the latter. Kant claims that if Hume had only seen that mathematics consists of synthetic propositions known a priori, he would have realized that causality as well as metaphysics consists of the same, and been saved from this skepticism. Finally, I address Kant's discussion of the limits and boundaries of reason, which refers to arguments in Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion. Kant's intention is to save religious belief from the skepticism that he perceived in Hume's position. This section of the Prolegomena has received little attention in the Kantian literature, but will be dealt with in some detail here. Okay, so the main thing here is Kant is going to switch and claim, in contrast to Hume, no, it's not just matters of fact and relations of ideas that we see up here. It is synthetic propositions known a priori. So what is Hume's problem? The first 3 reprinted papers in this volume focus on what Kant thought was Hume's problem and how he sought to solve it. In the preface to the Prolegomena, Kant states that Hume's problem lay in accounting for the origin of the causal concept. Hume has led to this position on causality by the restrictions of his empiricism and its theoretical constructs. As there is no impression of the concept of cause, there can be no idea of it. Hume questioned the stance of his predecessors that the concept of cause could be thought by reason a priori, independent of experience. Kant was awoken by his dogmatic slumber by Hume's suggestion that the necessity in the causal principle arises solely from observation and experience, and his conclusion that the causal relation and its justification is a matter of fact. So there is no necessity for Hume. Kant goes beyond the empiricist picture of mental life as consisting of impressions, ideas, and the associations between them to concern himself with, quote, what type of faculties are necessary. Again, Kant is looking for the conditions, if there are any. What type of faculties are necessary for cognition and how their existence might be established. From a Kantian perspective, Hume had several problems which stem from his empiricism. This doctrine committed him to the view that only objects of knowledge are the contents of consciousness. Impressions and ideas and only judgments are those expressing matters of fact and relations of ideas. This led him, according to Kant, to regard any a priori principles, such as causal connection, to be fictitious and custom bred. So matters of fact or relations of ideas are the only objects of knowledge. Okay, this led him, according to Kant, to regard any a priori principles, such as causal connection, to be fictitious and custom bred, resulting in skepticism, as there can be no empirical ground for the validity of causal inference, as any empirical claim presupposes the principle in question. And the principle is not self-evident, as the concept of event and cause are separate ideas. The principle is natural and non-rational in character. The resulting lack of rigorous grounding led Kant to seek, quote, some criterion which is not subject to the defects of the rationalist and empirical methods of proof, and which is adequate to determine the validity or invalidity of general principles, end quote. Kant saw that a new conceptual context was necessary in order to justify the philosophical causal inference. This context consists of the categories, of which causality is one. Those principles known a priori yet synthetic that determine the condition, sense impression, providing justification or objective validity that combats the perceived skepticism inherent in the traditional empiricist position. However, these concepts are also synthetic in nature. While they are logically independent of experience, they are applied to experience. They are not tautological, nor are they logically necessary. This realization represented an enlargement of the empiricist epistemological context. It went beyond the traditional division of the types of human knowledge, which Hume endorsed, into relations of ideas, matters of fact, to include a third type of proposition, synthetic yet known a priori. In order to avert Hume's skepticism that results from the traditional division of propositions, such propositions must be possible. In order for objectively valid causal inferences in metaphysics to be possible, such propositions must be possible. To solve Hume's problem, Kant had first to ask and then answer the question, quote, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Given that we do make some judgments where the terms in the judgment are synthetically connected, but whose validity seems to be established a priori, Kant must ask how such judgments are possible. The first 5 sections of the Prolegomena are set at this stage. What is the source of metaphysical knowledge? Metaphysics is not empirical, but is knowledge of it a priori. The very concept of metaphysical knowledge, Kant claims, implies that such is its nature. It is knowledge that lies beyond experience. What kind of knowledge can be called metaphysical? Here Kant draws the distinction between analytic and a priori propositions and synthetic a posteriori propositions. The former are logical in nature, and as their terms are connected through identity, all bodies are extended. They are dependent upon the principle of non-contradiction. Our knowledge is not expanded by knowing the truth of this proposition. On the other hand, we can only connect the terms in the proposition and determine the truth of some bodies have weight by appeal to experience. My knowledge of the concept of body will be expanded by knowing the truth of this proposition. But it is Kant's insight to recognize that certain sciences consist of synthetic, not logically connected judgments which have a priori certainty and whose origin lie in the pure understanding of reason. Judgments of experience and judgments of mathematics, while synthetic, are also a priori. Hume's mistake with respect to mathematics was to regard mathematical knowledge to be analytic, given the traditional empiricist division. Propositions known a priori could only be analytic in nature. Quote, metaphysics is properly concerned with synthetical propositions a priori, and these alone constitute its end. The generation of a priori cognition by concrete images, as well as by concepts in fine of synthetic propositions a priori in philosophical cognition, constitutes the essential subject of metaphysics. The dogmatic philosopher sought, quote, the sources of metaphysical judgments in metaphysics itself, and not apart from it, in the pure laws of reason generally, rather than examining the workings of reason to know first what kinds of propositions are possible and then to seek where they may be applied. Dogmatic philosophers look to the subject first, subject contents first, presupposing the analytic a priori, synthetic a posteriori distinction. We do not have, is metaphysical knowledge possible at all? Is metaphysics possible at all? We do not have to ask her whether synthetic a priori knowledge is possible, as mathematics and natural science, quote, both contain propositions that are thoroughly recognized as apodictically certain, partly by mere reason, partly by general consent arising from experience, and yet as independent of existence. In order for metaphysics, knowledge of the highest being, and a future existence to be possible as a science, it has to be shown that it too consists of such propositions. The question to be asked then is, quote, how is knowledge of pure reason possible? To begin with, what we know, that mathematics and natural science consist of synthetic a priori propositions, show how these are possible within the sciences, and then apply our findings to metaphysics. The main transcendental questions that need to be asked are, how is pure mathematics, pure natural science possible? How is metaphysics possible? How is metaphysics possible as a science? These questions form the body of Kant's inquiry in the Prolegomena. In 21, we find Kant's logical table of judgments. This table consists of the exhaustive set of possible judgments, divided into four types, as to quantity, as to quality, as to relation and modality. These judgments correspond to the transcendental table of the concept of the understanding, which is also given in the CPR. Briefly, those concepts or judgments as to quantity are concerned with how much of the subject, S, the predicate term P, refers to or pertains. All S are P, some S are P, no S are P. Judgments as to the quality are concerned with the reality of the terms of the judgment. Those are to modality, refer to modes of existence. S may be, may not be P. S is P. S must be P. Finally, those of relation include claims to inherence and subsistence, accidents and substance, community, interdependence, and causality. The complete solution to the Humean problem occurs after Kant has shown that judgments of causality as a species of synthetic a priori judgments are possible. When the objects of experience are subsumed under those pure concepts of the understanding, the solution occurs after Kant has shown, quote, quote, shown adequately that these concepts and the principles drawn from them stand over stand a priori before all experience and have their undoubted objective rightness, though admittedly only in respect of experience. Knowledge has been enlarged with apodictic certainty. So here we go. Yes, there's much more now. Okay, let's see what we have on causality. And it was Hume's conclusions with respect to the subjective validity carried by causal inferences that roused Kant from his uncritical position and led him to examine the faculties of reason that make such judgments possible. A brief outline of Kant's position on causality is appropriate. An understanding of Hume's own position will allow the reader to see what Kant thought was lacking in the system, objective validity, and how he sought to remedy this lack. Hume argues that causality is the connection that the imagination is determined to make on the basis of repeated experience, rather than it being on a connection between objects. So that is definition one. He was satisfied that the only grounding possible for causal judgments was to be found in the natural propensity of the imagination to connect related objects. The psychological grounding and validity was sufficient to justify our causal claims, and in fact is all that is available to us in empiricism. Yeah. So the only grounding possible for causal judgments was to be found in the propensity of the imagination to connect related objects. This psychological grounding and validity was sufficient to justify our causal claims, and in fact is all that is available to us in empiricism. The process, according to Hume, is as follows. I am presented with A and with B, and A occurs in time before B, and they occur in close physical proximity. After repeatedly being presented with similar conjunctions of A and B, my imagination eventually comes to expect B whenever A is close at hand. So it's a projection. So on subsequent occasions, the appearance of A leads me to expect B, and I will likely be distressed if B does not appear and seek to determine why B did not appear, depending on the intensity and frequency of the conjunction. And the appearance of B leads me to attribute A as a cause of its appearance. The ground of validity of causal judgment is found in the natural and psychological necessity in the imagination to connected, related perceptions. A person who is suddenly brought into this world would observe a continual succession of objects, but could not reach the idea of cause and effect because the powers, quote, by which all natural operations are performed never appear to the senses. So we have this expectation, you know. Excuse me. By gradual experience, this person will come to infer the existence of A as a cause whenever B, the effect, appears. This does not occur because this person has now acquired some insight into any powers, but because the person is determined, through the force of the associative principles of the imagination and repeated experience, accustomed to draw Hume's conclusion. Hume's response to his predecessors consists of an attack on their claims of causal connection occurring in the objects themselves, rather than in the observers of the objects. The causal connection is the result of the observer's imagination drawing associations between observed data. Thus, Hume, before Kant made the first move in the Copernican revolution, he moved the observer to the center of her experiential universe by making the observer the seat or source of the causal nexus. Given experience of a particular sort, that is, the observer experiencing items in temporal and spatial proximity, and given the associative operations of the imagination, the observer will make causal associations and judgments. Causality, then, is a principle drawn from custom and habit, the great guide of life. Its necessity and validity are psychological, grounded in the associative faculty of the imagination. Yeah. So, thus Hume, before Kant, made the first move in the Copernican revolution. He moved the observer to the center of the experiential universe by making the observer the seat of the source of causal nexus. Given experience of a particular sort, that is, the observer experiencing items in temporal and spatial proximity, and given the associative operations of the imagination, the observer will make causal associations and judgments. Causality, then, is a principle drawn from custom and habit, the great guide of life. Its necessity and validity are psychological, grounded in the associative faculty of the imagination. So that was that's just one page. And to be able to reduce human causality to one page, that is not easy. We have in this the imagination, the psychological grounding in validity, the lack of objective validity. We have the expectation of B and A. So I'm presented with A and with B, and A occurs in time before B, and they occur in close proximity. So you have to have close proximity for it. And then after repeatedly being presented with this similar conjunction, I come to project that whenever B has happened, A is close at hand. And the ground of validity of causal judgments is found in the natural and psychological necessity of the imagination. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Kant and causality as a synthetic a priori concept. The Humean observer is thus at a whim of her experiences and associative imagination. Her judgments based on her perception have subjective validity, as they refer to her experience as a thinking subject. The Kantian Copernican revolution, on the other hand, not only moves the observer to the center, but makes the observer the rational being, an active participant in the process, as she synthesizes her sense perceptions by means of pure concepts of the understanding. Objective validity is conferred upon the judgments as they agree to the object and are not just expressions of her experience. Kant sees Hume's problem with respect to causality to be the result of his, quote, regarding not the whole of his problem, but a part which by itself can give us no information. By only accounting for the perceptual experiential side of causal connection, Hume leaves us with a dose of skepticism with respect to the validation of causal judgments, and their connection is synthetic and their only necessity is psychological. Kant's answer to Hume is that objective validity can only be given to an observed conjunction if the conjunction is conditioned or determined by a causal principle that is synthetic but also a priori. Kant gives the following example in footnote on page 68. When the sun shines on the stone, it grows warm. This judgment, however often I and others may have perceived it, is a mere judgment of perception and contains no necessity. Perceptions are only usually conjoined in this matter. Hume stops here. But if I say the sun warms the stone, I add to the perception a concept of the understanding, vis-a-vis that of cause, which necessarily connects with the concept of sunshine, that of heat, and the synthetic judgment becomes of necessity universally valid, objective, and is converted from a perception into experience. Ooh, this is a long one. According to Hume's analysis of causality, as I repeatedly encounter the sun shining and the stone gradually becoming warm, the association is gradually set up in my imagination between these two perceptions, such that I will come to regard the sun as being the cause of the stone warming. It results from my experience and my imagination, and the more repetitious and intense my experience, the more immediate and forceful will be the association. I establish between these two perceptions. The association is the core of Hume's analysis of causality. And it is all that the imagination needs to make a judgment of causality. On the basis of my experience, I claim that the sun is the cause of the stone becoming warmer. But for Kant, succession is not sufficient. First observing the sun shining and then feeling the warmth in the stone, or seeing a ship upstream and then downstream, will not prompt us to regard the sun as being the cause of the stone being warm, any more than it will prompt us to regard the ship upstream to be the cause of the ship downstream. The whole problem of causality is not just accounting for or providing the psychological mechanism by which we make causal judgments, but it is providing the objective validity of these judgments. Hume mistook subjective necessity, the force of the association based on custom or habit, for objective necessity. Without this objective component, Hume ran his ship ashore for safety, landing on skepticism, there to be let and lie and rot. Kant's intent is to give the ship a, quote, pilot who, by means of safe astronomical principles, drawn from knowledge of the globe, and provided with a complete chart and compass, may steer the ship safely whither he lieth. The concept of causality is not derived from experience, rather it is applied to experience. Only in its application would we ever think of calling the relationship between two perceptions a causal one. Simply observing succession and proximity in space, no matter how many times it occurred, would never leave us to see something called causality. But without A occurring, B would not occur. So we could argue for Kant, why does the person judge that one object has produced the other, has been the cause of another? From this inference of the existence of one from the appearance of the other, first, perceptions are compared and conjoined in consciousness of my state, subjective validity, but then a judgment with respect to consciousness in general, objective validity, must follow. Without viewing the succession and making the inference through or by means of the category of something called causal relation, the production of B by A would never be inferred from either the appearance of A followed by B, or from the inference of the existence of A from the appearance of B. In other words, there may be a psychological necessity in the process of the mind, but there is no objective validity in the judgment made. What is required, Kant argues, beyond becoming to expect the stone to become warm whenever the sun shines, is the addition of the concept of causality, which confers objective reality on the judgment by referring it beyond our individual sensation to an object that converts the judgment of perception to a judgment of experience conditioned on the principle of causality. While perception of a particular sort of perception given to us in a particular way are not only necessary, but limit the way or prescribe the conditions under which the category is applied. For example, A and B must be observed successively. It is only by the use of the category of cause and the effect of the causal or logical form of the judgment, all events of causes can be applied to the perceptions. In 20, Kant draws the distinction between judgments of perception and judgments of experience. This distinction, which Gurrier calls notorious, has been a topic of some discussion in the literature, and include in this volume paper Uhling's Waren Mungsturler and Frangenstuhler. I hope I'm getting that pronounced correctly, reconsidered. This paper focuses on sections 18, 19, and 20 of the Prolegomena, which contains Kant's arguments relating to the categories, the a priori concepts under which every perception must, first of all, assumed, and then by the means change into experience. Uhling points to a major but interesting conflict between the Prolegomena and the CPR. In the latter text, Kant seems to indicate that all judgments of perception do become judgments of experience when the categories are to be superadded. However, in the former text, Uhling says he explicitly argues that there are some judgments of perception that cannot become judgments of experience, such as aesthetic judgments, which refer merely to feeling and not to any object. Those judgments of perception which can stand under conditions be synthesized according to categories can become judgments of experience. Jung uses the judgments of perception experience to clarify that Kant means by universal and objective validity. This is an important clarification because these are the features that mark judgments of experience. However, he argues that what Kant means by these terms is a point of interpretation. The nature of a judgment of perception is that it expresses how things are for me at this time. Its subjective validity derives from its reference to my sensations and the subjective necessity of their connection. I do nothing but refer to my sensations to one another. A judgment experience, on the other hand, carries universal validity by adding a third aspect to the connection. In making such judgments, we claim that a certain connection obtains generally and that everyone under similar circumstances should make the connection. Quote, the given situation must be subsumed under a concept, which determines the form of a judging in generally relative to the intuition, connects its empirical consciousness and consciousness generally, and thereby procures universal validity of empirical judgments. So the intuition is subsumed under a concept which determines the forming of judging in general relativity to the intuition, connects its empirical consciousness in consciousness generally, and thereby procures universal validity for empirical judgments. In other words, what is given to me as a sense perception, and which I connect in my consciousness and judgment of perception, I dropped the glass and broke it, the connection of two perceptions, is then conditioned by the understanding, applying a priori concept, for example, causality. Once connected with this concept, objective validity is conferred upon the judgment, so that anyone else experiencing a similar connection of perceptions will make the same judgment. Dropping a glass is the cause of its breaking, the two perceptions with the addition of the concept. In making such judgment, we assert that a certain connection obtains universality, and hence that everyone should find this connection obtaining under similar circumstances. Okay, so we've just got a little bit to go. In spite of the scholarly disputes raging about this distinction, some of which Uhling refers to, it is usually one of four purposes. It helps us to indicate the sense in which Kant thought Hume did not fully represent the whole problem of causality by allowing only judgments of perception. The observer's connection of her own experience and finding necessity in the associative processes of the imagination. Hume took only the first step in accounting for causal judgments. For Hume repeatedly observed, succession is necessary and sufficient for the imagination to make judgment of causality. With judgments of experience carrying the objective validity permitted by the addition of the third aspect, the a priori concept of causality, Kant took the final step. For Kant, observed succession is necessary, but it is not sufficient. In Kant's system, causality is a synthetic proposition known a priori, expands our knowledge, and that we are making connections in experience, but it is also a priori, in that it is applied to experience. The synthetic a priori nature of the causal claim can be shown by the following distinction. The analytic a priori judgments in respect to causality would be all effects are caused. If one analyzes the term effects and cause, one finds that what an effect is something that is caused. And the truth of the claim can be known before experience. The term effect is found or is contained in the term cause, so that it is not possible to conceive of an uncaused effect. However, the judgment all events are caused is a synthetic proposition known a priori. It is possible to imagine a uncaused event as an event is an occurrence with no imputation of causality in it. But unless the causal connection is known a priori and applied to succession, no judgment of causality is possible. So that's very important. Only when the given intuition is subsumed under a concept which determines the form of judging in general with respect to the particular intuition, which judgments have an objective validity or justification. According to Kant, Hume did not distinguish between two kinds of synthetic judgments: those by which we pass beyond our concepts of objects by experience, synthetic a posteriori, and those whereby we pass a priori beyond our concepts, and so to extend our knowledge. Hume regarded the self-increment of concepts to be impossible, concluding that causality arose from custom-bred habit that carried a universality and necessity that were only suppositions. Hume's error was in inferring from the contingency of our determination in accordance with the law to the contingency of the law itself, and not in carefully examining all the possible synthetic a priori propositions available to the understanding. If he had done so, he would have found that both causality and mathematics consisted of such propositions. Kant thought that the causal judgments that we do in fact make could have objective validity only if the judgment of perception, the judgment of expectation and cause and custom, when the sun shines on the stone, it grows warm, is converted into a judgment of experience by subsuming the given perception under an a priori concept. By adding the concept of causality, reason judges that the observed succession, the sun shining and the stone becoming warmer, is an instance of causality. The resulting judgment has objective validity. Hume's problem lay not in seeing the whole problem of causality. Kant's answer is that judgments of perception, while providing the content, lack the objective validity of a judgment of experience. The sun warms the stone, that is gained in applying an a priori concept to the observation. So, next we have mathematics. Yeah, this is a big one. Yep, that is a big one. So what I'm going to do is next time I will do the mathematics. So we read that for half an hour. Maybe I might just do a few pages of it. Okay, Kant and Hume and mathematics as synthetic a priori propositions. The first part of the main transcendental question is concerned with how pure mathematics is possible. An examination of mathematics, the propositions of which are synthetic, will reveal its a priori ground of knowledge. Mathematics is a science. It can only be possible as a science if its synthetic propositions can be known a priori. Kant claims that because Hume only utilized the synthetic a priori, analytic a priori distinction, he failed to notice that mathematics consisted of synthetic a priori judge propositions. To show the synthetic a priori nature of mathematical judgments, we will use Kant's own example, 7 plus 5 equals 12. The analytic proposition a priori would be 7 plus 5, the sum of 7 and 5. In this case, the subject term is contained in or thought in the predicate term, and it would be contradictory to deny this proposition. However, 7 plus 5 equals 12 is synthetic because the sum, 12, is only equal to 7 added to 5. When one adds something to the equation 7 plus 5, and what is added is counting. Calling in the aid of fingers of my hands as intuition, I now add 1 by 1 to the number 7 and units which I previously took together to form the number 5. And with the aid of that figure, the hand, see the number 12 come into being. I cannot, by simply analyzing the term 7 and 5, come up with the term 12, as I can with 7 plus 5 equals the sum of 7 and 5. According to Kant, Hume rejected the synthetic nature of mathematics because he rejected its a priori nature, as he proposed the exclusive disjunction of either analytic a priori, synthetic a posteriori. As mathematics was not known a posteriori, it was known a priori, and thus its propositions are analytic. Had he seen that mathematics consist of synthetic a priori propositions, he could have, Kant claims, extended that category to include metaphysical propositions, and he could have saved them from their fate. If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school of metaphysics, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experiential reasoning concerning matters of fact? No, committed to the flames. For it contained nothing but sophistry. Several authors have explored the suggestion that Hume supposed mathematics could consist of synthetic a priori propositions. However, they all generally recognize that the criterion of certainty for Kant is logical necessity, while the hallmark for Hume's analysis is psychological necessity. Atkins argues that, quote, whilst Hume indubitably held mathematical propositions to be a priori and necessary, his apparent conception of necessary proposition was wider than the current, or indeed Kant's conception of an analytic one. That whilst he did not explicitly pose the question, analytic or synthetic, the term, after all, not his. He came closer to the treatise to regarding mathematical propositions as synthetic necessary than analytical truths. Okay, so that is, then we get into, well, I'll just finish this. Beck in his volume agrees that Kant thinks Hume was in error in failing to see the difference between a priori in the sense of going beyond experience and a priori in the sense of underlying possible experience. Beck's claim leads us to an ongoing exegetical problem, one that is an important issue in Kant scholarship. It concerns the definition of technical terms and is the focus of Daniel Anderson's paper, A Note on Syntheticity of Mathematical Propositions in Kant's Prolegomena. Included in this volume, how one uses technical terms such as analytic and synthetic is bound to bias one's outlook. Anderson is concerned with Ayer's attack against Kant's meaning of distinguishing between analytic and synthetic judgments. Kant thinks he is adopting a logical distinction in mathematical propositions, whereas Ayer argues that in fact he is adopting a psychological one, holding that 7 plus 5 equals 12 as a synthetic proposition is based on the psychological criterion, not on the logical one. Ayer's position seems to be, given his definition of syntheticity, a return to pre-Kantian view held by Hume. If a given proposition is synthetic, it can only be known a posteriori. For Ayer, this is analytically true, as what it is for a proposition to be synthetic is for that proposition to be known through experience. Ayer also presents his own definition of analyticity, that a proposition's validity should follow simply from the definitions of the terms contained in it, to which Anderson replies that this is Ayer's own definition and not Kant's. Other scholars who have suggested that mathematics for Hume consists of synthetic truths known a priori urge caution with respect to drawing any similarities between these truths and synthetic a priori propositions. Coleman, for example, urges that Hume can only be rendered consistent if one adopts the proposition he held that mathematical propositions were synthetic a priori. However, she notes, quote, the sense in which I am using synthetic a priori should not be confused with its Kantian meaning. The sense in which he would maintain that there are synthetic a priori judgments must be understood only as indicating a necessary relation between empirical concepts, which cannot be determined by the formal relation between concepts or by analysis of these concepts. Newman also makes similar points. While geometrical propositions are necessarily truths, but not analytic, Hume makes no attempt to secure its necessary truth with the Kantian formula, although he maintains that where the propositions of geometry are concerned, quote, the person who assents not only conceives the idea according to the propositions, but is necessarily determined to conceive them in a particular manner. The only factor he makes appeals to the determining is the character of sensible space, the invariant nature of which seems to rest in the treatise upon the consent character of physical space. So that is the causality and mathematical introduction to Kant's reading of Hume. So yeah, I might go over this again. I'm definitely going to read more of the Prolegomena. Okay, take care.